She was 55, he was 35. One stormy evening changed her life. Margaret Thornton had built an empire from nothing. At 55, she was untouchable, CEO of a consulting firm worth $40 million, feared in boardrooms, respected by everyone. But on a November evening, when rain hammered against her office windows, she made one decision that would strip away everything she'd spent 30 years building. The man who walked through her door that night was half her age. Daniel Chen, 35, brilliant and desperate, carrying a portfolio that could save his dying startup. What she offered him in exchange for her investment seemed simple at the time, professional, transactional. But 3 months later, when the storm really hit, Margaret would discover that the younger man she'd underestimated had been playing a game she never saw coming, and the price of her miscalculation would be more than money. It would be her dignity, her reputation, and everything she thought she knew about power. Margaret's corner office overlooked the Seattle skyline, a testament to 3 decades of ruthless decisions and calculated risks. She'd divorced at 40, childless by choice, married only to her ambition. Her silver hair was cut sharp, her suits sharper. People didn't warm to Margaret Thornton. They simply got out of her way. Daniel Chen arrived at 7 p.m., his pitch deck still wet from the rain. She'd agreed to the meeting as a favor to a mutual connection, expecting to decline within 10 minutes. Instead, she found herself listening. His AI-driven logistics platform was genuinely innovative. The projections were conservative but promising. The problem was obvious. He needed $3 million to survive the next quarter, and every traditional investor had turned him down. "You're too young to understand what you're asking for," Margaret said, closing his presentation on her tablet. $3 million isn't just capital, it's trust. And trust, Mr. Chen, is something you haven't earned. Daniel didn't flinch. His dark eyes held hers with unsettling steadiness. What would it take to earn it? The question hung between them like a live wire. Margaret had built her fortune reading people, finding their pressure points, knowing exactly when someone was desperate enough to agree to her terms. She recognized that desperation in Daniel now. It reminded her of herself at 30, hungry and willing to do anything to win. 6 months, she said finally. You work directly with me. I control every decision in your company. You take no salary. You prove the concept works. And if it does, I'll give you the $3 million at a valuation that's actually fair. And if it doesn't work? Margaret smiled coldly. Then you've wasted 6 months of your life, but at least you'll have learned from the best. Daniel should have walked away. Later, he would realize that's exactly what she'd expected him to do. But his startup was his last chance. His student loans were crushing him, and his co-founder had already quit. He was drowning, and Margaret Thornton was throwing him a rope made of razor wire. He extended his hand. Deal. Their handshake sealed more than a business arrangement. It marked the beginning of a game neither of them fully understood they were playing. The first month was brutal. Margaret dismantled Daniel's business model piece by piece, forcing him to rebuild it according to her vision. She scheduled calls at midnight, demanded revisions on weekends, and criticized every decision with surgical precision. He worked from a desk outside her office like an intern, despite having founded the company she was now controlling. This is what you wanted. Proximity to power. Well, here it is. Does it feel like you imagined? But something unexpected happened during those grueling weeks. Daniel didn't break. He absorbed her criticism, implemented her suggestions, and began to anticipate her thinking. More unsettling, he started pushing back when she was wrong, and occasionally, impossibly, he was right. Their working dinners stretched later. Conversations shifted from spreadsheets to personal history. Margaret found herself telling him about building her firm from a single client in a basement office, about the male partners who'd underestimated her, about the loneliness that came with always being the most powerful person in the room. Daniel shared his own story. Immigrant parents who'd sacrificed everything for his Stanford education, the pressure of being the first in his family to achieve this level of success, the fear that he'd fail them all if his startup collapsed. "You think age gives me some advantage," Margaret said one evening, wine glass in hand, her guard lowered by exhaustion and unexpected connection. "But you have something I lost 20 years ago. People still believe in you. They look at you and see potential. They look at me and see someone to be survived." Daniel's response was quiet but direct. "I look at you and see someone who forgot how to be vulnerable. That's not power, Margaret. That's just isolation you've convinced yourself is strength." No one spoke to her like that. No one dared. She should have ended their arrangement right there. Instead, she kissed him. It happened without thought, without plan, just a moment of raw human need breaking through years of carefully constructed walls. When she pulled back, horrified at her own impulse, Daniel didn't mock her or retreat. He simply said, "I've been waiting for you to do that for 3 weeks." What followed was a relationship that violated every rule Margaret had ever imposed on her life. They kept it secret, knowing the judgment that would rain down. Predatory older woman, opportunistic younger man. The whispers would destroy them both, professionally and personally. But in the privacy of her penthouse, age and power dynamics dissolved. They were just two lonely people who'd found unexpected solace in each other. For the first time in her adult life, Margaret felt something more addictive than control. She felt seen. 3 months into their arrangement, Daniel's platform launched its beta test. The results exceeded even Margaret's projections. Early clients were already signing contracts. Investment interest was flooding in from firms that had previously rejected him. The technology worked. Daniel Chen was about to become very wealthy, with or without Margaret's $3 million. She should have felt triumphant. Instead, she felt terrified. "We need to make this official," Daniel said one evening, standing in her living room with a seriousness that made her chest tighten. "I want people to know about us. I'm tired of hiding like we're doing something wrong." "You don't understand what you're asking. I'm your investor. I'm 20 years older. Every business publication will frame this as exploitation. They'll say I took advantage of your desperation, that our relationship was the real price of my investment. Or they'll say 2 adults made a choice. Why do you care so much what strangers think? Because I've spent 30 years building credibility in a world that looks for any reason to dismiss women like me. Because one photograph of us together will undo everything I've worked for." Women like you? You mean women who've convinced themselves that success requires being alone? That letting anyone in is weakness? The fight that followed was vicious. Words meant to wound found their targets with practiced accuracy. When Daniel finally left, slamming the door behind him, Margaret told herself she'd dodged a bullet. Better to end it now than face the inevitable humiliation of a public relationship. But the silence that followed was suffocating. For the first time in her divorce, 15 years earlier, her penthouse felt less like a sanctuary and more like a prison she'd built herself. A week later, everything exploded. An anonymous tip reached a business journalist known for exposing corporate misconduct. The story published on a Wednesday morning. Silicon Valley investor accused of exploiting desperate entrepreneur in exchange for sexual relationship. The article framed Margaret as a predator. It detailed her control over Daniel's company, suggested the relationship had been her price for investment, and included anonymous sources claiming she'd used her position to coerce a vulnerable younger man. The narrative was devastating, perfectly crafted to destroy her reputation. Margaret's phone erupted. Her board demanded her resignation. Clients pulled contracts. 3 decades of credibility evaporated in hours. The woman who'd built an empire was now the villain in a morality play about power and exploitation. But the cruelest cut came when she read Daniel's statement to the press. "I have no comment on my personal life, but I can confirm that Miss Thornton's investment strategy has always been professionally questionable. I'm grateful to have moved beyond that chapter of my career." He'd betrayed her. Worse, he'd weaponized their relationship to absolve himself of any responsibility, positioning himself as the victim while she burned. The younger man she'd underestimated, the one she'd allowed herself to be vulnerable with, had been playing a longer game all along. Margaret Thornton, who'd spent her life reading people and controlling outcomes, had been completely blindsided by the one person she trusted. For 2 weeks, Margaret lived in the wreckage. She resigned from her firm to spare it further damage. She stopped answering calls. She watched from her penthouse as her professional obituary was written in real time across business media. The shame wasn't just professional. It was the humiliation of having been so thoroughly deceived. She'd prided herself on seeing through people, and Daniel had made her look like a fool. Every moment of their relationship now felt like a calculated manipulation. Every vulnerability she'd shared felt like ammunition she'd handed him. On a Thursday evening, her phone rang from an unknown number. She almost didn't answer. When she did, the voice on the other end was the last one she expected. "Miss Thornton, my name is Rachel Kim. I'm a private investigator, and I need to meet with you immediately. It's about Daniel Chen, and you're not going to believe what I found." An hour later, Rachel sat in Margaret's living room with a laptop and a file folder that would change everything. "I was hired by Daniel Chen's former co-founder. He suspected something wasn't right about how Daniel had suddenly gained access to your investment network. What I found goes deeper than a simple business relationship." She opened her laptop. Email chains, bank transfers, recorded phone calls. The evidence painted a picture that made Margaret's blood run cold. Daniel hadn't stumbled into her office 3 months ago by chance. He'd researched her extensively, her investment patterns, her reputation for tough negotiations, her personal life. He'd engineered the entire introduction through a mutual contact he'd cultivated specifically for access. The desperate startup founder was a performance designed to trigger her instinct to control and mentor. But here's what Rachel had discovered that explained everything. Daniel Chen was already backed by a consortium of investors who developed a strategy to acquire Margaret's consulting firm at a discount. They'd identified her as a threat to a merger they wanted. Daniel's job was to get close to her, create a scandal that would force her resignation, and destabilize the firm's valuation. The relationship wasn't an accident. It was phase 2 of the plan, calculated to either gather damaging personal information or create a compromising situation that could be weaponized later. Daniel had played the role of the vulnerable, brilliant entrepreneur perfectly, knowing exactly which of Margaret's buttons to push. The anonymous tip to the journalist had come from Daniel's consortium, complete with fabricated sources. "But here's what they didn't plan on," Rachel said, her voice softening. "Daniel fell for you. Really fell for you." She played a recording. Daniel on a phone call with his backers 2 weeks ago after the scandal broke. "I can't do this anymore." Daniel's voice cracked with emotion. "She didn't deserve this. What we're doing, what I did to her, it's destroying an innocent person. I want out." The response from his consortium was cold. "You're in too deep. If you back out now, we'll make sure everyone knows you were complicit in securities fraud. Your startup was never real, Daniel. It was a front for this operation. You exposed yourself the moment you signed on." Another voice on the call. "Besides, you already gave your statement to the press. Margaret Thornton is finished. Just take your payout and disappear." Daniel's response was almost inaudible. "I loved her. That was real, even if nothing else was." Margaret sat frozen, the recording playing through her shock. Everything she'd believed about the past 2 weeks was inverted. Daniel hadn't betrayed her out of ambition or cruelty. He'd been trapped in a scheme that had spiraled beyond his control. And his lukewarm statement to the press wasn't vilification. It was the minimum he could say while being blackmailed by people who'd set this entire catastrophe in motion. "Why are you showing me this?" Margaret finally asked. Rachel's smile was grim. "Because Daniel's former co-founder wants revenge on the people who destroyed his business to create this scam. And because Daniel Chen hired me to give you this information, even though it incriminates him. He wanted you to know the truth, whatever the consequences." She handed Margaret a handwritten note in Daniel's familiar script. "I was supposed to destroy you. Instead, you made me want to be someone worthy of the woman I pretended to be vulnerable with. I have no right to ask for forgiveness, but you deserve to know that the worst decision I ever made was agreeing to deceive the one person who saw me as I wanted to be. The money, the startup, all of it. None of it was worth losing you. I'm sorry. D." Margaret Thornton hadn't built an empire by being passive. The revelation about Daniel's consortium didn't absolve anyone, but it clarified the battlefield. She spent the next week working with Rachel, gathering evidence, building a case. Then she made 3 phone calls. The first was to her attorney. The second was to the business journalist who'd published the original story. The third was to Daniel Chen. "Meet me at my office," she said when he answered, his voice heavy with resignation. "1 hour. Come alone." When Daniel arrived, he looked like he'd aged years in 2 weeks. The confident entrepreneur who'd walked into her life 4 months earlier was gone, replaced by someone who understood exactly how badly he'd broken something irreplaceable. Margaret didn't offer him a seat. She simply slid a folder across her desk. "Rachel Kim is very thorough. I know everything." Daniel's face drained of color. "Margaret, I don't." Her voice was ice. "You don't get to apologize. Apologies are for accidents. You orchestrated my professional destruction. The fact that you felt guilty doesn't undo the damage." "I know. I need you to understand that what happened between us, that was real. Everything else was the lie, but not us." Margaret's laugh was bitter. "And that's supposed to matter? You built our entire relationship on a foundation of deception. Every moment I trusted you, you were working for people actively trying to destroy me. Do you have any idea what that feels like?" "I do, actually." Daniel's voice broke. "Because I fell in love with you while knowing I was going to hurt you. Every day I spent with you made it worse. I tried to find a way out, but they had me trapped from the beginning." "So you were a victim too? Is that the defense?" "No." He met her eyes, and the raw honesty there was almost painful. "I'm not a victim. I made choices. Bad ones. I told myself I was desperate, that the ends justified the means, but the truth is, I was a coward, and you paid the price for my cowardice." The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything they'd lost.
Finally, Margaret spoke. "Your consortium is going to face federal charges for conspiracy and securities fraud. The journalist who published that story is preparing a retraction and an exposé on the people who fed her fabricated information. My attorneys are pursuing civil damages that will bankrupt everyone involved." Daniel nodded, accepting his fate. "I understand. Whatever legal consequences come, I deserve them." "You're not listening." Margaret's voice softened almost imperceptibly. "You're not part of the lawsuit, Daniel. Rachel's evidence shows you tried to back out. Your statement to the press, while painful, was actually more restrained than what they demanded. And this," she gestured to the folder, "proves you ultimately chose to expose them rather than protect yourself." "I don't understand." "Neither do I," Margaret admitted. "By every rational measure, I should destroy you along with the rest of them. But I've spent 2 weeks thinking about what you said, about vulnerability and isolation, and I realized something. You weren't entirely wrong." She walked to the window, her back to him, watching rain streak the glass. "I built my life around never being caught off guard, never being vulnerable, never needing anyone. And you know what that got me? A beautiful prison and the certainty that anyone who got close was a threat. You were a threat, Daniel. And somehow you were also the first person in 20 years who made me feel like being vulnerable might be worth the risk. I broke that trust." "Spectacularly." She turned to face him. "But you also gave me evidence that could exonerate me, even though it incriminates you. You chose my reputation over your freedom. So here's what I can't figure out. Was that love or just guilt?" Daniel's response was immediate. "Both, but mostly love. The kind that makes you wish you could go back and make different choices, even knowing you can't." Margaret felt the words hit her chest like a physical blow. This should have been simpler. He'd hurt her, she'd retaliate, the story would end. But nothing about their relationship had ever been simple, and apparently that wouldn't change even now. "I can't forgive you," she said finally. "Not now, maybe not ever. What you did broke something fundamental." "I know. But I also can't pretend that what we had wasn't real, at least toward the end. And I can't ignore that you ultimately chose to do the right thing, even when it cost you everything." She pulled out a second folder, this one containing a check and legal documents. "Your startup platform is genuinely innovative. These are investors, legitimate ones, who've reviewed your work and want to fund it. $3 million, the amount I originally promised. Consider it payment for your testimony against the consortium." Daniel stared at the documents like they might evaporate. "Margaret, I can't accept this, not after everything." "You can, and you will, because I'm not doing this for you, I'm doing it for me. I refuse to let those people take anything else from either of us. They wanted to destroy your career along with mine. I won't give them that satisfaction." "This doesn't fix what I broke between us." "No," Margaret agreed, her voice steady but sad. "That's probably broken permanently. But maybe something else can be built from the pieces. Not a relationship. I'm not that forgiving or foolish. But perhaps an understanding that people are more complicated than the worst things they've done." Daniel walked toward the door, then paused, turning back. "For what it's worth, the version of myself I was when I was with you, that's who I want to be. You made me believe I could be better than my circumstances. I just wish I'd lived up to that before I destroyed everything." "Then spend the next 20 years proving it," Margaret said. "Build something real this time. And maybe someday when you're 55 and someone much younger than you makes you feel vulnerable, you'll remember this moment and make a different choice than I did. You'll trust them." After he left, Margaret stood alone in her office, watching the rain finally clear. Her reputation would recover. Truth had a way of surfacing eventually. Her firm had already reached out about her return. But something fundamental had shifted inside her. She'd spent 30 years believing that power meant never being vulnerable, that control was safety. Daniel Chen had shattered that illusion painfully and completely. And in the rubble, she'd discovered something unexpected. Vulnerability wasn't weakness, it was just human. And being human,
with all its messy complications and painful betrayals, was somehow richer than the sterile perfection she'd constructed. 3 months later, Margaret received an email from Daniel. Subject line: "Thank you." The message was brief. "The platform launched successfully. I'm building something I'm proud of, and I'm trying every day to be the person you saw in me, even when I couldn't see it myself. I hope you're allowing yourself to be human occasionally. You're brilliant at it, even when it hurts. D." She didn't respond, but she didn't delete it either. Some stories don't get neat endings. Some betrayals don't lead to reconciliation. And some connections leave permanent marks, neither wholly good nor wholly bad, just undeniably real. Margaret Thornton learned that power could be rebuilt. Trust was more complicated, but the courage to keep being vulnerable, even after it leads to devastation, that was the hardest kind of strength, the kind that no one applauds because they're too busy protecting themselves from their own fears. And on particularly lonely evenings, when the Seattle rain reminded her of a stormy night 4 months earlier, she allowed herself to remember what it felt like to let someone in. The memory hurt, but it also reminded her she was still capable of feeling something beyond control. That, she decided, was worth the price of the lesson. Have you ever trusted the wrong person, or discovered that nothing was what it seemed? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more stories about the complexity of trust, betrayal, and second chances, press the like button, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones that don't have easy answers.